She thought she'd been stood up. Another date gone wrong. Another promise that never turned into anything real. But when two 6-year-olds marched into that coffee shop with secrets in their eyes and a mission in their hearts, everything changed. That's not the beginning of a romantic comedy, it's the true beginning of a story that would touch millions once it reached the internet. Tonight, we bring you the extraordinary tale of how one woman's failed blind date turned into a story about second chances, love, and the power of two little girls who refused to let their father give up on happiness. Kayla Emerson wasn't looking for a fairy tale. She was 32, a veterinarian, and perfectly content with the quiet rhythm of her life and her clinic, her patients, her rescue dog, and her small circle of friends. But her best friend and colleague, Diane, had other plans. Diane insisted Kayla meet someone, a good guy. She said, honest, hardworking, maybe even the one. Kayla had resisted at first. After all, blind dates rarely ended well, but something in Diane's voice, a kind of certainty, convinced her to give it a chance. The man's name was Matthew Caldwell, 34 years old, an architectural engineer, widowed. Kind eyes, Diane had said, a little shy, maybe, but real. And so, on a chilly autumn evening, Kayla found herself at the Maple Avenue coffee shop, staring at the door and wondering why she'd agreed to this. The clock read 6:47, 17 minutes late. The chamomile tea in front of her had gone cold, untouched, and every tick of the clock made the air heavier. Around her, the cafe tilde copyright hummed with the soft noise of other people's conversations, laughter, whispers, the sound of spoons against ceramic. To Kayla, every couple seemed to remind her of what she didn't have. It wasn't bitterness, just a quiet ache, the kind that builds up over years of putting work first and love second. She told herself she'd wait 5 more minutes, just 5, then she'd go home, tell Diane it didn't work out, and forget this night ever happened. But fate, or perhaps two little girls, had other plans. At exactly 6:51, the bell above the cafe tilde copyright door chimed. Kayla's eyes flicked up instinctively, hope rising despite everything. But instead of a man in his 30s, two identical little girls appeared, small, determined, with curly brown hair that bounced as they walked, and eyes the color of new spring leaves. They looked around the cafe tilde copyright like detectives searching for a suspect. Then, spotting Kayla, they locked onto her with startling focus and marched straight to her table. "Are you Miss Kayla?" the taller one asked, her voice serious and confident. Kayla blinked, startled. "Yes, a broken bar I am." "And you are?" "I'm Daisy," the girl replied, gesturing to her twin. "This is Hazel. Our daddy's sorry he's late." It took a few seconds for Kayla to process what she was hearing. Their daddy. Could it be? Diane hadn't mentioned children, hadn't mentioned twins. Before she could respond, the other girl, Hazel, added softly, "He had to stay at work because of an emergency." Then Daisy sighed, at a kind of sigh you'd expect from someone 3 decades older, and said, "We should tell the truth. Daddy doesn't know we're here." And just like that, Kayla's night transformed from disappointment to disbelief. The girls had snuck out, well, not exactly snuck, since a babysitter was waiting in the car, but they had come here on their own, determined to save their father's date. Daisy explained that they'd overheard him talking about a big problem at a construction site, something about the foundation of a new library. He'd said he couldn't believe it was happening tonight, of all nights, when he had something really important at 6:30 at the Maple Avenue coffee shop. So, the girls had pieced it together. They'd convinced their babysitter, Mrs. Ferguson, to drive them there after, as Hazel shyly confessed, a little bit of crying. Daisy quickly corrected her. Strategic crying. It was necessary. For Kayla, it was impossible not to laugh, not just because of the absurdity, but because of how fiercely these little girls loved their father. In their eyes, this wasn't a mistake, it was a mission. They were on a rescue operation, Operation Save Daddy's Date. As the minutes passed, Kayla began to see glimpses of the man she hadn't yet met. The twins spoke of him with the kind of pride that can't be faked. They told her how he'd learned to braid their hair from YouTube tutorials after their mom passed away, how he sang their mother's favorite songs every night, even when his voice cracked, how he built them a treehouse in the backyard with his own hands, Daisy said A because he wanted them to have a place that was just theirs. Each story painted a picture of a man who wasn't perfect, but who loved deeply and tried endlessly. A man doing his best to be both father and mother, builder and nurturer, protector and dreamer. When the girls mentioned their mother A, Mommy went to heaven 2 years ago, A, Kayla felt something in her heart shift. Their voices softened, their eyes dimmed slightly, and in that moment, the weight of their little mission became clear. They weren't just trying to fix a missed date, they were trying to fix something bigger around their father's sadness. They wanted him to smile again. By the time Kayla ordered them hot chocolate, the three of them were laughing like old friends. 2 mugs with mountains of whipped cream arrived, and the twins sipped carefully or tried to, ending up with white mustaches that made even the barista chuckle. Kayla couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so light, so unexpectedly full of warmth, and just as she thought the night couldn't surprise her any further, one of the girls whispered something that would set the rest of the story in motion. Daddy was so excited about tonight, Miss Kayla. He even ironed his shirt. That was the moment Kayla realized that this wasn't a failed date, it was a postponed beginning. A beginning orchestrated by 2 little hearts who believed in love more fiercely than most adults ever do. Kayla sat there in quiet disbelief, her heart caught somewhere between amusement and tenderness. 2 small girls had completely changed the course of her evening, and possibly her life, with nothing more than honesty and love. Daisy and Hazel chattered endlessly now, filling the space where awkward silence had been moments ago. They told stories about their dad the way children tell fairy tales, filled with exaggerated details and bursts of admiration. He was the best pancake maker in the world, a master builder, and really bad at singing, but he tries. Every word made Kayla's curiosity grow stronger. She had come here expecting rejection, perhaps another shallow conversation that ended with polite smiles. Instead, she found herself drawn into the warm orbit of 2 small girls whose love for their father radiated from every word. When the Cafe Tilde copyright door opened again, Kayla almost didn't turn around, but the twins did instantly. Daddy! They cried in unison, leaping from their seats. The tall man who entered looked both exhausted and alarmed. His work jacket was still dusted with concrete powder, his hands calloused, and his expression caught between relief and disbelief. Matthew Caldwell had clearly just come from a construction site. His eyes swept the Cafe Tilde copyright and finally landed on the 2 girls, A and then on Kayla. For a moment, time seemed to pause. His face softened with both embarrassment and something like recognition. He apologized immediately, his voice low and genuine, the kind that carries years of quiet responsibility. He explained about the emergency at the site, how the concrete mix had failed inspection, and he couldn't just walk away. I should have called, he admitted. I didn't realize the girls would have broken bar take matters into their own hands. His tone was firm, but there was no real anger, only relief that they were safe. Daisy tried to defend herself, explaining that they just wanted him to be happy again, and that Miss Kayla seemed like a nice person. The man sighed, defeated by his daughter's honesty, then turned to Kayla. I'm so sorry. They have a talent for chaos. It wasn't a polished first meeting, but it was real, stripped of pretense, full of sincerity. Matthew sat down across from her, still in his work clothes, and for a few moments, they simply talked. He had that kind of calm energy that fills a space without trying to. His eyes were a deep, quiet gray, and there was something in them that told of both strength and loss. He spoke about his daughters, how they were the reason he got up every morning, how he'd promised them that no matter how hard things got, they would always have each other. It wasn't pity that filled Kayla's chest as she listened, it was admiration. He wasn't pretending to be perfect, he was just trying to do his best, every day. What struck Kayla most was how different this man was from the ones she had met before. There was no arrogance, no scripted charm. Instead, he listened genuinely, carefully, as if every word she said mattered. When she mentioned her job at the veterinary clinic, his face lit up. You save lives too, he said quietly, just smaller ones. The simple sincerity of the comment made her laugh, and for the first time in a long while, it felt easy. The conversation flowed effortlessly from their about work, about books, about the small comforts that make hard days bearable. They found humor in unexpected things and shared quiet understanding in the pauses. The girls, meanwhile, were content to sip their chocolate and occasionally interject with unfiltered truths. "Daddy snores," Daisy said suddenly. "But not when he's really tired," Hazel corrected. Matthew only shook his head with a smile that said he was used to it. Kayla couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a man look at his children with such unguarded love. There was no exhaustion in that gaze, no resentment, just pride and tenderness. It was clear that every sacrifice he made, every long hour at work, was for them. As the evening stretched on, something in the atmosphere of the Café Tilde copyright shifted. The harsh fluorescent light softened. The noise faded, and Kayla realized she was no longer watching the clock. The awkwardness that had clouded her earlier melted into a kind of gentle comfort. Matthew's voice was calm and low, his laughter rare but genuine. When he spoke about losing his wife, there was no self-pity, just quiet grief, tempered by gratitude. "She was the light in our house," he said softly, glancing at his daughters, "and somehow, they've kept it shining." Kayla didn't know how to respond at first. All she could think was how strange and beautiful it was that life could bring two people together like this, through coincidence, chaos, and the stubborn hope of two little girls. The world outside was dark now, the Café Tilde copyright nearly empty. But inside, there was warmth in the laughter of the twins, in the glimmer of shared understanding between two adults who'd both known loneliness too well. When the night finally came to a close, Matthew stood, offering his hand. His grip was warm and steady, the kind that makes promises without words. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not walking out before I got here." Kayla smiled, realizing she couldn't have left even if she'd wanted to. Something about this man, this moment, felt like the start of something that didn't need perfection, only truth. As they walked out together, the twins skipping ahead, Kayla glanced up at the night sky. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel heavy. It felt open, wide enough to hold a new story, one that none of them had expected but all seemed quietly ready for. The days that followed that unexpected evening were a quiet whirlwind for Kayla. She found herself smiling at random moments, remembering little details from that night, how the way Daisy had tried to stir her hot chocolate with a straw, the way Hazel had giggled every time her dad pretended not to hear her teasing, and the way Matthew's voice had softened whenever he looked at his daughters. There was something profoundly grounding about them, something honest that stayed with her long after they left the Café Tilde copyright. It wasn't just attraction, it was the strange comfort of being seen, really seen, after a long time of being overlooked. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, at least not soon. Life had taught her to lower expectations, to assume silence where words might have been. But 3 days later, as she was closing up her veterinary clinic, her phone buzzed with a message. It was short and simple. "Thank you again for that night. I owe you a proper cup of coffee, one without whipped cream battles." It made her laugh, and before she could second-guess herself, she replied. That's how it began, not with grand gestures or declarations, but with easy, natural conversations that flowed like they had always been meant to happen. Over the following weeks, their connection deepened. They met again, sometimes at the same Café Tilde copyright, sometimes at the park where Matthew took his daughters to play. There was always a kind of gentle chaos around them, spilled juice boxes, laughter echoing across playground swings, Daisy insisting that Kayla learn the proper way to make a daisy chain. Slowly, without either of them forcing it, the boundaries between friendship and something more began to blur. Matthew's presence became a constant, a steady kind that didn't demand attention but made its absence felt when it wasn't there. Kayla was surprised at how naturally she fit into their world. She had always thought of herself as someone who lived on the periphery, tending to animals, keeping her circle small, never quite part of the busy, noisy rhythm of family life. But with Matthew and his girls, she didn't have to perform or pretend. They welcomed her not as a guest, but as if she had always belonged. The girls adored her. They showed up at her clinic one Saturday with a basket of wildflowers and a hand-drawn picture of her with their dog, whom they insisted she had to adopt into the family. Matthew had stood behind them, a little embarrassed, holding a box of pastries. They insisted, he said with a smile. I didn't stand a chance. It was in those moments, small, unassuming ones, that Kayla realized how much she began to care. Not just about Matthew, but about the family they already were, the one she was slowly being woven into. There was warmth in the way the girls ran to her after school, in the way Matthew looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, in the silence they shared when words weren't needed. She'd never imagined love could grow this way, not out of grand passion or instant sparks, but out of consistency, gentleness, and quiet joy. Still, she could sense the hesitation in Matthew. He was careful, not distant, but cautious in the way of someone who'd lost too much before. One evening, as they walked along the riverside after the girls had fallen asleep in the stroller, he admitted it. I told myself I wouldn't do this again, he said softly. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think I could. Losing her, their mom had broke something I didn't think could be fixed. His words weren't heavy with sorrow anymore, they carried something different, acceptance. He looked at Kayla then, eyes steady, voice quiet but certain. But that night at the cafe, tilde copyright a broken bar, something shifted. You didn't just show up, you stayed. Kayla didn't need to respond with grand words. She simply reached for his hand. Sometimes, love didn't need to be announced, it only needed to be recognized. From that point on, things changed subtly but unmistakably. Matthew started to smile more. The twins began to call Kayla our friend when introducing her to people, though Daisy once accidentally said our Kayla, and Matthew hadn't corrected her. There was a growing sense of belonging, fragile but real, forming in the spaces between laughter and shared silence. What made their story so powerful was its ordinariness. There were no perfect dates, no cinematic confessions, no sweeping gestures under the rain. There was life, messy, busy, full of interruptions and imperfect moments, but held together by something authentic. They built their connection through shared mornings over coffee, small kindnesses, and the slow healing that comes from being cared for without conditions. As the weeks turned into months, it became clear to everyone around them, to Diane, to Matthew's co-workers, to the twins' teachers, that something beautiful was unfolding. People began referring to them as a family long before either of them had used that word aloud. When the story of their unusual first meeting at the blind date rescued by two brave little girls made its way online after a cafe, tilde copyright regular shared it, it struck a chord with thousands. Comments poured in about kindness, fate, and the way love finds people when they least expect it. But for Kayla and Matthew, the story wasn't about going viral. It was about finding something they both thought they'd lost forever, the simple, unspoken certainty that they weren't alone anymore. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't need to. Their story grew the way real love often does, quietly, steadily, and without fanfare. What began as a failed blind date had become something far deeper, the rediscovery of hope, the mending of grief, and the beginning of a new chapter neither of them had been brave enough to dream of. Months had passed since that fateful evening at the cafe, tilde copyright, and what began as an accident of timing and fate had blossomed into something that felt both steady and miraculous. Kayla and Matthew had fallen into an unspoken rhythm, the kind that doesn't need explanation, the kind that simply works. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden declarations of love shouted in the rain. Instead, their connection deepened through small gestures, morning texts, shared laughter over burnt pancakes, late-night calls after long workdays, and quiet walks where silence spoke louder than words. What had once been loneliness in both their lives slowly transformed into something whole. Kayla had never imagined herself as part of a family. Her days used to begin and end at the clinic, with only her rescue dog waiting for her when she came home. Now, there were 4 toothbrushes in her bathroom instead of 1, tiny shoes by her door, and little drawings of animals taped onto her fridge. Every detail of her life had started to blend with theirs, naturally and without force. The twins adored her. They insisted she attend every school art show, every Sunday park picnic, and every bedtime story marathon. Their laughter had filled spaces in her heart she didn't even know were empty. Matthew, too, had changed in ways even his friends noticed. The fatigue that once lived behind his eyes had softened. The quiet sadness he carried, the kind that comes from loving and losing deeply, had been replaced by a kind of peace. Kayla brought balance into his life, not by trying to fix him, but simply by being there. She reminded him that love didn't have to mean forgetting someone, it could mean finding the courage to keep living, to build something new without erasing the past. They never rushed things. Both had been shaped by loss, hers by years of quiet rejection and his by the pain of saying goodbye too soon. But as they learned to trust again, they began to dream together. One chilly Saturday morning, while the girls played in the yard, Matthew turned to Kayla as they sat drinking coffee on the porch. His hand brushed hers, casual but certain. "You know," he said with a soft smile, "I used to think love was something that ended, but maybe it just changes shape. Maybe it finds its way back to you when you're ready." Kayla didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, this man who had become her home, and felt tears form in her eyes. "I think you're right," she said quietly. That was the closest either of them came to a confession, but they both knew what it meant. From that moment, something subtle but real settled between them, a shared understanding that they weren't just walking alongside each other anymore, they were building something together. The story of how they met had spread far beyond what either expected. The Cafe Tilde copyright owner, who had witnessed the entire scene that first night, posted about it online with a single line: "Two little girls tried to find love for their dad, and they did." Within days, the post went viral. People from around the world commented, sending messages about hope, fate, and kindness. Reporters reached out asking for interviews, but Matthew politely declined every time. "It's not a story about going viral," he said. "It's a story about being human." For him and Kayla, the beauty of their story wasn't in its popularity, it was in the quiet truth that love had found them when they weren't looking. Their relationship grew in the same quiet way. On weekday evenings, Kayla would stop by the construction site with coffee, and Matthew would smile in that way that made her heart tighten. On weekends, he'd fix small things around her clinic, broken doors, loose shelves, claiming it was just to keep busy, though everyone knew it was his way of taking care of her. The twins started calling the clinic our second home, often bringing in lost kittens or injured birds for Kayla to treat. Together, they made her world larger, fuller, alive with purpose beyond herself. It wasn't perfect. There were difficult days, arguments about schedules, exhaustion from work, the occasional misunderstanding. But even then, there was something different about how they handled it. They didn't walk away or retreat into silence. They stayed, talked, listened. Kayla once told a friend that she never realized how healing it could feel to argue with someone who didn't want to win, only to understand. As time passed, it became impossible for anyone around them to see them as anything other than a family. The twins' teacher once accidentally referred to Kayla as Mrs. Caldwell during a parent-teacher conference, and though she blushed, neither she nor Matthew corrected her. Later that evening, he smiled and said, "Maybe she just saw what's already true." And so, their story, born from loneliness, awkward timing, and the bravery of two little girls, became a quiet testament to what love really is. It's not perfect beginnings or flawless appearances. It's showing up, staying when it's easier to leave, and believing that kindness can build something lasting. 1 year later, on the anniversary of that night, Matthew brought Kayla and the twins back to the same cafe told the copyright. The girls ran ahead, laughing, while he lingered at the door with her. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd be grateful for a construction accident and two stubborn little girls." Kayla smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Life's funny like that," she whispered. Inside, everything looked the same: the warm lights, the familiar smell of coffee, the quiet hum of conversation. But for Kayla, everything was different. She wasn't the woman waiting alone at a table anymore. She was part of something bigger, a family, a home, a story she hadn't expected but was endlessly thankful for. And as Matthew reached across the table to hold her hand, she realized that sometimes, the best love stories aren't the ones that start perfectly. They're the ones that begin when two broken hearts decide to try again, and build something beautiful from what's left.